right, Genesis chapter 36 this morning. I won't say anything about the photo up there. Nothing at all. We've gone backwards, though. All right. Genesis chapter 36 here this morning. This is an interesting chapter in a number of different ways, and I think you'll understand that as I move through this passage here this morning. It is meant to be a very clear break in the line of Genesis in terms of being able to take our attention off of some individuals and begin to refocus our attention on other individuals. So we're at another boundary point, right? Where some individuals are passing off the scene. We're not going to think about them anymore. Other individuals are becoming more important, and we're gonna spend time with them. And this actually manages to do this by echoing two different chapters that we've already seen. And so a lot of what we are looking at this morning, we are in many ways looking back on things that we have already seen. There's a little bit new that is coming on, and I'll bring that out as we work our way through. But it's primarily intended as a dividing spot to allow us to move forward into new areas, which we'll begin looking at next week in chapter 37. But there are things for our attention here this morning, and so we'll spend our time looking at that. As we look at Genesis 36 here this morning, in many ways our mind goes back most to Genesis chapter 25. All right, and just to refresh your minds, when we were looking at Genesis chapter 25, we were looking at, again, a dividing spot, a boundary. We were ending the life of Abraham, and we're beginning to take our focus and begin to focus it on his son Isaac. And as the author of Genesis does that for us in Genesis chapter 25, he does it by including and basically writing off everyone who no longer mattered in the story. We looked at, the chapter starts off by looking at the children of Abraham's concubine. Right? Lists them all out, tells you that they all existed, tells you all of their names, and then tells you that Abraham gave them gifts and sent them away, right? Because they were not the child of promise, the seed that had been promised to Abraham, right? They were unimportant, but they don't matter. They exist. You should know about them. There is historical reasons why you're going to know about them, but they don't really matter. And so we write them off. Similarly, we wrote off Ishmael. Right? He bothers to even tell you these are all the sons of Ishmael, which becomes important a little bit later with Esau, as we'll see this morning. But he gives you all the children of Israel and then basically says, yep, we're done with them too. Right? And this is really what chapter 36 is doing for us again. Only this time we're doing it with Esau. And this time we're given a very large section about Esau. This is a much fuller treatment than Ishmael got. This is a much fuller treatment than the sons of Abraham's concubine got. But the end goal is exactly the same, right? We're going to let you know about Esau. We're going to let you know about Esau's descendants. But then after this, folks, we're done with Esau. He doesn't matter anymore. He is not the child of promise. He is not the one through whom the promises of God are going to come through. Those are coming through Jacob. Those are coming through Israel and will be passed on to Israel's sons hereafter, which is where our focus turns in the next chapter. So there's a lot of similarities that are taking place between these two chapters. Right? You can look very easily and think about many of them. Right? In both cases, we have a firstborn son that is not getting the promise. We would have expected Ishmael to get the promise rather than Isaac. But God said the promise is coming through Isaac. It's not coming through Ishmael. Similarly, Esau is the first one. Though they are twins, right? Though they are occupying that same space for 9 months, Esau is the one that comes out first. We would expect that promise to fall to Esau, but it's not going to, right? And God said as much. In both situations, we find that the son whom the father would prefer the promise passes on to doesn't get it either. Right? When God is speaking to Abraham and promising, I'm going to come and give you another son, Abraham basically says, well, but couldn't we just do this through Ishmael? I already have Ishmael, right? Abraham does love his son Ishmael at some level, but God says, no, that promise is going to come to Isaac. You look back at Isaac's life, and what is Isaac doing? He wants desperately to give the blessing to Esau. Right? Go kill something, right? I love the animals that you hunt. I love the animals that you bring back. I love that game. Go make me something, right? That is Isaac's desire for whatever reason, whether he doesn't understand the promise, whether he doesn't believe the promise, whatever his rationale is, he would much prefer that this promise be given to Esau. but it's not going to come to Esau either. There's a lot of very strong similarities here that are taking place. And so this is what we're looking at here this morning. There are also a number of challenges and issues in this passage, and I want to kind of address those. I know that there are many of you you're reading along either in preparation for Sunday, or maybe you go home after the fact and you go back and you read the chapter through, especially for the chapters that we don't cover everything. And so I want to lay out that there's a couple challenges that are in this passage that just exist, and I want to help you to become aware of those. The first one of these is the name of Esau's wives. If you're looking with me here in chapter 36, and you look in verse 2 of chapter 36, we've got the wives of Esau are mentioned here. We see that Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, and the granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Also, Basemath is Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. Okay, so 3 wives. Now, if you're keeping track of Genesis, and I know that's difficult because we're doing a chapter at a time, but if you're keeping track of Genesis and keeping that all together in your mind, that's not entirely a surprise. We see 3 wives. You're expecting 3 wives. The problem is that when you go back in the previous passages where the names of the wives have been given previously, the names don't match. If you go back to Genesis 26, and don't turn there, but if you go to Genesis chapter 26 and look at verses 34 and 35, this is when we are first told that Esau is taking wives from the children of the land. We are told that they are both Hittites, and we are given the name of the one being Judith and the other one being Basemath. Okay? When you turn to Genesis chapter 28 and verses 6 through 9, this is after Jacob is departing, after his parents send him away to go find a daughter, and Esau realizes, oh, mom and dad are not particularly pleased with the other 2 wives that I have. Well, he goes out and he gets himself a 3rd wife, which is what we expect, brings our number to 3. But we are told that he marries one of Ishmael's daughters, and her name is Mahalath. Okay, now you look at verses 2, and we do in fact have the one person that is in fact remaining is a Basemath, right? We have a Basemath, but the problem is the Basemath here is the daughter of Ishmael, not a Hittite. Okay, and then we have 2 other names that don't match at all, right? And so this is an issue, and it's very difficult to explain how exactly you end up with a situation. What I would focus on is the fact that you have the same basic underlying narrative that exists. Esau has 2 daughters who are Hittites, who are Canaanites, who are children of the land, and he goes and marries one daughter of Ishmael. Why the names change, I have no explanation for you. In many ways, most of the best explanations that I have found, and I don't like leaping to this, is that there has been some editorial work that has been done here. And this comes up again in the next 2 points that I'm bringing up. So I want to throw that out there. The underlying narrative is the same. He has 2 wives, 2 of them are Canaanites, one of them is the daughter of Ishmael. So it supports the underlying story that exists there, but the name changes are difficult to explain. The second issue that exists in this passage is understanding exactly when some of this passage is meant to be referencing. If you jump down to verse 31, and we're going to look at both of these passages in a more positive light here in a minute, but I just want to lay it out here in case you're reading. In verse 31, we get a long list of kings that are present. And then we follow very shortly into another list of chiefs that exists between 40 and 43. 2 people have already made reference to chiefs already. So talk about Esau, right? There's a lot of chiefs in this passage, right? And we get another round. It's a 3rd round of chiefs by the time we're done with this. What is curious is that when you look at the phrase that exists there, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the sons of Israel. There is some question as to whether what is being, how to interpret that. The options are either to say, and most echo it the way most of your translations are going to put it here, right, before any king reigned over the sons of Israel. So the emphasis here is being on Israel and Israel having a king. We know that takes a good deal of time, right? We've got about 400 years that Israel is going to spend down in Egypt. Then you've got another 40 years running around the wilderness. Then you've got the period of Judges, and then you finally get Saul, right? There's a very long period of time between the time that we are talking about right here, and we were looking at the sons of Israel, and the time that sons of Israel have a king, right? We've got a lot of time to wedge this all in here. That's perfectly fine, okay? So that's a possibility. The other possibility is that this is meant to be interpreted as before any king of the sons of Israel reigned over Edom, right? So kind of flipping around exactly what is taking place here. Now, if I'm simply looking at Genesis chapter 36, I favor the first point of view. Right? We've got a very long time in which to have a king in Egypt before there's a king over Edom, or before there's a king over Israel. We know that there's plenty of time for that to take place. We know that Moses is a very educated man. He gets brought up in Pharaoh's household. Right? There is every chance, there is every reason to believe that Moses is actually thoroughly acquainted with the history of the nations that are present at the time of Egypt when he is down there in Egypt. He knows about Edom. He knows about the Canaanites. He knows about the other kings. Egypt is a political player. He would have been trained to understand who these people are, where they have come from, what they're doing, and what they're capable of. He should know these kind of things, being in his position, being part of the royal household. So you could imagine that he's simply recording, perhaps even from memory, these are the kings that have been over Edom, right? Much the way your children and you were taught in grade school, right? These were the kings of Rome, right? These were the kings of England, right? You had to learn those things so that you have some context of the world around you. He's an educated man. He could be reproducing this. The challenge with this comes is that if you were to turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verses 43 through 54, you get this reproduced almost verbatim for you again. Everything from verse 31 all the way down to verse 43. It pops up again. Okay? Now you say, well, that's not a really big deal. An awful lot of other things get reproduced verbatim again. We go over genealogies of Adam. We go over a lot of genealogies. But the problem that exists is that if you're reproducing it there in Chronicles, you expect it to have a little more bearing on what's going on in Chronicles and less of a bearing of what's going on back in Genesis, right? And this is where the second interpretation starts to become a little more palatable. As Chronicles picks up, we pick up with David's reign. Right? We ignore Saul, we pick up with David's reign. And one of the very first things that David does as he is exercising his power, as he is solidifying control over all of Israel, is in 1 Chronicles 18, verses 12 through 13, he takes on Edom and he beats them, and he beats them badly. He puts garrisons all inside of the land of Edom. And from that point on, until the reign of much later of one of the other kings, Edom is essentially a vassal state of the nation of Israel, okay? And so this is where you're kind of left with a quandary. Are we talking about the kings as Moses knew them back in the time of Genesis, the kings maybe that he had expected you might run into as they're entering the promised land, as they go in there? Or are we providing context for David later on, and these are the kings that David is going to be, basically, he's going to end that line, in essence, as he conquers them there in 1 Chronicles 18. It becomes all the more interesting because the last king that you have mentioned down in verse 39, most of your translations, I think, have Hadar. You have Hadar there mentioned as the last king, right? You see Bel-Hanan, the son of Akbor, died, and Hadar became king in his place. Most of you also have a footnote there that probably says Hadad, right? That's every translation that I looked at reproduces that exactly. The only big difference between Genesis 36 and 1 Chronicles chapter 1 is a line in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 51 that mentions, and Hadar died. Hadad died. When, we're dealing with a lot of Edom history, aren't we here? When Solomon comes to the throne, as Solomon is being judged for his sins, right, the idolatry that he pursues, God raises up three enemies for him. He raises up Jeroboam, who will later become king of Israel, which will afflict Rehoboam particularly. He raises up an Aramite king, an Aramaean king, who's going to become particularly troublesome. And he raises up a man named Hadad, who was of the line of Edom, who had escaped David's wrath against Edom and had sheltered down in Egypt and then comes back. And so what you have then is basically a hey dad and a hey dad too, is what you're looking at there, right? A father and a son, someone who's coming up to take vengeance on Solomon. And so this makes the question a lot more interesting, right? You seem to have a dynastic name, right? Like you have a King George I, a King George II, a King George III, right? You have something like that showing up, and it seems to line up more with Chronicles than it does with Genesis. So it becomes interesting, and there's a lot of debate over what's going on with these kings here. There's a third issue that exists in the chapter, and then we're done. We're into the meat of the book here. There's a third issue that exists, and this is verses 40 through 43. Okay, our third line of chiefs. No one knows what to do with these guys. Okay, just point. I'm just going to put it out there as bluntly as I can. No one really knows what to do with these guys. We've already looked at two lines of these. We've got our first line of chiefs in verse 15. These are the sons of Esau. We got another line of chiefs that pops up, verse 29. Those are the chiefs of the sons of Seir. It would appear. And by the time you get to verse 40 and 40 through 43, you've got this third line of chiefs, and they don't really line up. Of the chiefs that are present, 4 names appear that would appear early in the chapter, and it's a very fun exercise to follow names through this chapter because there's a lot of repetition that's taking place. But there's only 4 names that match up. Of the 4, 2 of them are actually women that are listed as chiefs here. One is a concubine, the other is the wife of Esau, which makes it highly unlikely that we're actually dealing with chiefs at all here. Or we are dealing with chiefs that are very far removed, that you've somehow repurposed the name and now given it to a male descendant of some capacity. And so it's very difficult to imagine what exactly is going on with verses 40 through 43, but it gets repeated in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, so there's something going on there, but it's difficult to explain. So I'm throwing that out there. If you were spending the time doing the reading, if you're spending time trying to follow along behind, though if you're running and saying, I have questions about that, you're not alone. I have questions about this. The commentaries have questions about this, right? These are some tricky things that are going on here, but I'll leave that alone here, okay? And just know that those things exist. However, there are a lot of good things that we can look at in this chapter, and I want to spend our time looking at that here this morning. Before we do that, let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll dive in here. Father, again, we thank you for allowing us to be here this morning. Father, to love you, to worship you, and Father, to think through what you have for us in this book. These words are written for our understanding. They are written for our edification. Even though this may be a chapter that we struggle with more than others, Father, you have things for us here, and we'll look at those here this morning. And so we thank you for that. Father, I pray that as we go through this study, we are over and over again brought back to the understanding of your faithfulness. It is your faithfulness that we must be focused on, that we have to be focused on. We are disappointed in our own. We are disappointed in the faithfulness of those around us. And if there is to be any hope, if there is any security, if there is any rest, it has to be found in you. And we see that over and over again throughout this book. So give us grace, Father, to rest ourselves in you and to worship you as we do that. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Having dealt with the difficulties now, right, so we can put those things to rest. Let's look at the rest of this chapter and think about what is going on here. The chief aim of this chapter is to write off Esau, to get him off the scene, but in doing so in a way that still reflects the central core and that central theme of what is going on in this book. And for most of this chapter, we're looking back. We're doing a lot of looking back because we're kind of putting a bow on everything that we know about Esau, everything that we know about Edom, and we're kind of walking away from it. The first thing that I want to point out is verses 1 through 5. Verses 1 through 5, we get a reminder here of Esau's disobedience. Verse 1, we see this. Now these are the records of the generations of Esau, that is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, and the granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Also Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Ruel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush and Jalam and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Of all the things that stand out to us about Esau, we are probably most familiar with him in the kind of that kind of a tragic character in this story, right? If it could go wrong to Esau, it seems to have gone wrong with Esau. If Esau could do wrong, he's done wrong. It seems like in every way that you've turned about. These wives that are present here, again, ignoring the fact that the names have changed, right? These daughters, with the underlying narrative still being there, these daughters are a reminder of Esau's disobedience and Esau's lack of faith, right? This is the core of Esau's story in this chapter here. We looked at chapter 25. And when we saw chapter 25, we saw that Esau is having this interaction with Jacob, right? Esau comes, he's faint, he's been out in the field all day, he's hungry. Jacob is in there with apparently some amazing smelling lentil soup that he's stirring around in there. And Esau says, listen, I'm going to die, you got to give me some of this. And what does Jacob do? Okay, fine, I'll give you some of this delicious smelling stew, but you got to sell me your birthright. And what does Esau do? He does it, right? We're familiar with this. We know that story by heart. And when we looked at that in chapter 25, we dealt with the fact that the core of that issue is a lack of faith on Esau's part, right? He despised his birthright. He did not have any hope. He did not put any value in the promises of God. The promises of God were immense. Right? If Esau were to have been the one who had that birthright, he would have inherited the entire land of Canaan. Right? He would have inherited promises that include your seed being great. He would have included promises that were immense blessings on he and his descendants in perpetuity. And Esau counts that so little that he's willing to say, yeah, I'll give that up for a bowl of soup. It's comical, right? It is laughable that a man would do that, but he does that, right? He thinks so little of it in his mind that he can make that kind of a trade and can do it flippantly, right? Even if you think that he's just being, whatever, that's still a very flippant attitude towards something that is an immense promise. The value of it should have been enough to say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Just give me the bowl of soup, right? There are other ways of handling that situation, right? And he handles it as poorly as he possibly could. In addition to that are the presence of these wives. And I think these wives are an indication of his mind also going along that same route. If you believe in the promises of God, that God is going to give you this land of Canaan, and he's going to, by understanding of that, then also evict all of the people that are in that land. Would you go and marry one of those people? Would that not present a potential conflict later on down the line? Right? Would that not present a potential challenge? It seems to have some kind of an issue with his parents. Right? Because these daughters are not something that they're enjoying at all, right? And please, let's get rid of these. Esau realizes that this is why he picks up Ishmael's daughter, right? Trying to get in a little bit better with his parents because things are not going well. But I think it betrays that same kind of understanding. Esau doesn't treat these promises seriously. As far as Esau is concerned, he is the firstborn. He deserves what is coming to him, which is the blessing. He deserves whatever it is, his share of his father's wealth. He deserves whatever it is that he gets as part of being part of the family, probably that field that they own and that one single cave. Right? He probably anticipates that he gets all this, and it's going to continue to be, life is going to continue to be exactly as it is right now. There'll still be Canaanites running all over the place, and we're just gonna live among them. Right? And so why not? Why not just marry one of them? Right? What's the big deal? What's the harm? And I think it betrays a lack of faith in the fact that the promises of God look completely different than that. It looks like all of those descendants being tossed out of the land, right? And your descendants being the ones who own the land. How can you mingle with them? How can you expect that is going to be okay? I think this probably is meant as an example to Israel to think through later on as they re-enter the promised land, and God gives them a command: I do not want you to intermarry with the daughters of this land. Right? Because the potential challenge is that you will end up worshiping the gods of those descendants rather than me and me alone. The very thing that will end up getting Solomon later on. Right? And I think Esau is serving as kind of a warning sign to that. Look at the only person you know who's married a Canaanite. What happened to him? He has no part in the land at all. He has no part of the promises at all. Though that is not the right behavior for someone who is one of those descendants here. And Esau serves as an illustration of that, a very graphic illustration of that, as Esau is written off the scene and no longer matters because he has not treated the promises of God with the proper faith and the proper respect that they are worth here. All right? So these daughters are a reminder again of what we have seen out of Esau. They are a reminder of his mindset that have cost him the birthright. Right? He has despised his birthright, and it will serve to haunt him for the rest of his life. Verses 6 through 8, we get an acknowledgement of God's will. An acknowledgement of God's will. This is where we find Esau fulfilling another repetition that we've seen once before. Verse 6, then Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all his household and his livestock and all his cattle and all his goods, which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. You look at that verse, you look at those verses, and particularly chapter 7, you're reminded of another incident you've already seen in Genesis, aren't you? You're thinking about Abraham and Lot, I hope. Right? You remember that Abraham and Lot, as God is prospering them, right? There begins to become strife that exists between those two men. This is back in Genesis chapter 13. Right? The herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abram are beginning to have a conflict. And there's a determination, there's a decision that needs to be made. We need to separate. Right? You go one direction, I'll go the other. And Abraham defers to Lot and says, you pick whatever you want to go. Right? Lot very greedily looks at the land of Jordan, that Jordan River Valley, where everything is green, where it is prospering, where there's also happens to be a lot of sin, and determines that I'm going to go in that direction, right? And basically, the way I interpret that is to leave Abraham with whatever's left, which is not nearly as green and not nearly as nice. Lot is concerned about his own well-being. Here in Genesis chapter 36, we see that same rationale having to exist again, right? Jacob has come back from the land of Aram, and he's come back very wealthy, right? He's already made a very big display of that, right? Sending all of these animals to his brother as kind of a peace offering, right? And just animal after animal and group after group trying to soften Esau up. You can't do that. You can't do that comfortably unless you already have a lot of other stuff, right? And that's exactly what that is meant to display. Jacob has grown. Jacob has prospered. He is wealthy. The situation that we see in Shechem probably only increases that. As he and his sons basically pillage an entire city and take all of their stuff, that is only increasing the amount of stuff that Jacob now has. Esau, on the other hand, has also been prospered. You remember as Jacob is sending those gifts to Esau, Esau doesn't say, oh yeah, I could use some more camels. I could use some more cows. What does he say? I got enough, right? And I think you can interpret that honestly as being an honest statement on Esau's part of that Esau himself has done well in the years that he's been in the land. And he has prospered, and he has grown. And so what you end up with is a situation where you have two brothers, and they are both exceptionally wealthy. And they both have an exceptionally large number of herds. And they have a lot of other people that are around them as well. Remember, Esau has a 400-man militia that he's got marching around? He's doing well. You've got to be able to support that and feed that in order to have that, right? You have both of them living there, thriving, and it is getting to be a point where it is too much to live together, right? The land simply cannot sustain all of them. And Esau makes a decision to leave. And I'll be honest with you, it is symbolic, right? It is symbolic what Esau is doing, but it is also one of the things that makes me almost like Esau more than I like Jacob at this point in time. There is no strife. Remember Abraham and Lot? They are fighting, right? And Abraham has to finally say, enough. This is not the kind of behavior that should take place. We have no record here of there being any fighting between these two brothers. Instead, all of the burden appears to be on Esau to say, listen, there's too much going on in this land. I'm going back over to Seir, right? I'm going to head over to the other side of the Jordan River. You stay here. You take place. There's something commendable about that. To be willing to be the bigger man, as it were, and to step back and to step away. There's something commendable about that. It makes me admire Esau. Secondly, if you were still bitter over the birthright situation, would you leave the land of Canaan willingly? I don't think that you would. Let me pull a map up here just so we illustrate this issue a little more clearly. So, and hopefully you can see this in the back. Most of you, you'll have Bibles and maps in the back. You can probably follow along pretty clearly. As Esau is moving to the land of Seir, it's this area down here in the very bottom right corner of the map. Okay, so it is on the other side of the Jordan River. It is on the other side of what is the land of Canaan. And so far up until this point, most of the activity of the patriarchs has been around this Hebron area and Gerar down here in the Negev. We've had Jacob coming back all the way back down. We've had Salem where we've seen activity before. But it's down in this area down here in the land of Canaan that everyone has been living, that everyone has been operating in. Esau is willingly saying, I am moving over here. I am moving out of the land of Canaan. I am moving away from this place that I have lived, or that I was probably living in before you came back, Jacob. I'm moving away because this land cannot sustain us. He is moving away from the land of promise. He is moving away from the land that was promised to Abraham and to Isaac. He is moving away from that. If you were still bitter about that situation, I don't think you'd move. I think you'd start fighting, right? I think you'd start having conflict over this situation, and you don't see that taking place. And what I think this suggests to me is that Esau has somehow made peace with the situation. I think you saw this already by the fact that he greets Jacob the way that he does, right? He didn't come out with an army of 400 men to destroy Jacob, right? And I don't think the gift softened him up because he doesn't seem to have really needed them, right? Esau has spent 20 years making peace with the situation that has arisen. He was never supposed to have that birthright to begin with. That birthright was going to be Jacob's and is always going to be Jacob's. While Jacob may have done it in a way that is underhanded, him and his mom, the way they conspired to do that, what has taken place has been God's will all along. And I think Esau has been brought to a point where he understands that this is the situation and is willing to step away, is willing to move away from his brother, to put himself in another spot that is going to be removed and allow them to exist in a place without any kind of friction. Esau does seem to be familiar with this place. We've seen him in Seir before. When Jacob is coming back into the land, and when he goes to send messages to his brother is down in Seir. That's where he sends the messages. When Jacob and his brother meet, as they meet there, and Jacob is all afraid for his life, and they begin to talk, and they talk about the gifts, and Jacob says, I'm going to come back down with you to Seir. Now, Jacob doesn't do that. Jacob goes back somewhere else, which again makes me think a little more of Esau than I think of Jacob. But we have seen Esau down here before. So presumably what Esau has been doing for a while is probably moving back and forth between these two pieces of land. And he basically makes the decision, from here on out, I'm no longer going west. I will stay in the land of Seir. Now, the land of Seir is not bad. Esau has not chosen something that is to his disadvantage. As we watch the history of Edom throughout the rest of the history of Israel, we see that Edom is a place where there's a lot of herd activity that is taking place. You look later in the reign of Solomon, and it details out the gifts that are coming from Edom, the tribute really that is coming from Edom, and it is immense. Hundreds of thousands of lambs, tens of thousands of sheep are coming to Solomon every year from the land of Edom as a tribute. So this is a place that is profitable for Esau to be in, but it is not the land of Canaan. Right? And it indicates that Esau has made peace with what is going on. He has acknowledged the will of God. He is willing to separate himself from his brother. And it indicates to me a heart that is in a good spot. Right? He is not interested in strife with his brother. He was not interested in killing his brother again like he was after he lost the birthright to begin with. Right? He has mellowed out. He has made peace with it and is acknowledging in some capacity that this is the promise of God. Right? What is happening is meant to take place and is what is meant to be, and he's made peace with this. The third thing that we see in this chapter is God's promises being fulfilled. Right? This is, I think, the greater lesson that exists, the greatest lesson that exists in this chapter, not only for Edom, but for the children of Israel and for us as well. And this has been a common refrain as we've gone through this book, has it not? We titled it Foundations and Faithfulness, right? And we did that for a reason. Genesis is a book that is laying out foundations of things that are to come, seeds of thoughts and seeds of themes that are to come. And it is also a book that is detailing over and over again the faithfulness of God. God is being faithful to individuals that don't really deserve it. Right? Abraham doesn't deserve the faithfulness of God. Isaac does not deserve the faithfulness of God. Jacob does not deserve the faithfulness of God. Jacob's sons do not deserve the faithfulness of God. And yet there is God making promises and keeping promises over and over and over again. And we see the exact same thing taking place here in Edom. To a lesser degree, but taking place nonetheless. If you turn back to Genesis 25, and I've made several references to it already this morning, but turn, if you would, back with me to Genesis 25. This is the root. This is the meaty substance behind all of the kings and all of the chiefs that we read about there. I'm not going to run through that list. You can run through it on your own time, right? It's a lengthy list, but the meat behind this is in Genesis chapter 25. In Genesis chapter 25, after we are done writing off the sons of Abraham's concubines, after we are done writing off Ishmael and his descendants, we move into Isaac, and we begin to see this scene of Isaac praying for Rebekah, praying for her to have a son. It has been many years since they have been married, and there's been no son. Finally, she becomes pregnant. Verse 22, this pregnancy is awful. This is an awful pregnancy. These kids are just fighting in the womb all the time, and it's painful and it's awful. And she goes and she inquires and asks, what is going on here? Why are we struggling so much? And the promise that God gives to her in verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. That fateful promise we know well, right? We've already touched on this already. It is going to be Jacob, not Esau, who's going to be the child of the promise, right? This promise makes that very clear. But it also makes it very clear, the very first part of 23, that 2 nations are in your womb. 2 nations are in your womb. While there is a radically different future for each of these 2 boys that are in your womb, one is going to be a child of the promise, one is not, they are both going to become a nation. They are both going to become something significant. It is very similar again to what we saw with Ishmael, right? God promised to Hagar that Ishmael is going to become a mighty nation in his own right? Not the child of the promise, not the one who inherits the land of Canaan, but in his own right, he will become a nation, right? He will become something great. God is promising the exact same thing for Esau and for his descendants right here. And as you look then from verses 9 of chapter 36 all the way down to the end of the chapter, this is exactly what you are looking at playing out. You are looking at the promises of God playing out exactly as he promised it in chapter 25. What you see is the proof of Esau, of Edom becoming a nation. Right? He is going to grow. He is going to thrive. You see this in 2 particular ways as you look at this chapter here. And it can be hard to see it because you're looking at all the names, you're thinking about everything, and how is that supposed to work together? But if you step back, you see what is going on. The first thing that you see is you see kings taking place here, right? When you look at, particularly at verse 31, you say, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the sons of Israel. We see Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhabah. Then Bela died, and Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, became king in his place. Then Jobab died, and Husham in the land of the Temanites became king in his place. Then Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the field of Moab, became king in his place, and the name of his city was Avith. Okay? And it continues to go for another few verses. What you don't hear in this chapter, as you are reading through, is you do not read that any of those kings that are mentioned are the son of the previous king. You see no mention of that whatsoever. And what this seems to suggest is that Esau's descendants, the tribes in essence that descend from him, are loosely organized, more like a confederacy. Okay? So they are related, they are aware of each other, they are working together in capacity, they are living together, but none of them is a ruler over the other. And what they seem to be doing is picking out kings from among themselves and putting that person up as a king. And this is probably what explains the chiefs that we find here, right? Why all these chiefs? It's probably representing the individual leaders over these tribes and representing that is how they are arranged. Right? You have this family over here, that becomes a tribe. You have this son, he becomes a tribe. You have this son, he becomes a tribe. You have this son, he becomes a tribe. Much the way you see with the children of Israel, right? You have the tribe of Dan. You have the tribe of Naphtali. You have the tribe of Judah, named after a son and loosely organized, at least for a good bit of their time. It probably suggests that Esau's history, somewhere during this point in time, also looked very similar to Israel. The only difference being is that Israel is ruled by judges, Edom is being ruled by kings. Okay? But these kings don't appear to be dynastic, right? It is not one king passing off rule to another king, passing off rule to another king, passing off rule to another king. It is one king being selected. He rules, he dies. They say, all right, who's next? They pick the next one. He rules, he dies. They pick the next one. He rules, he dies. And that's the way they seem to be ordering themselves. But the very fact of that proves that they are a nation in and of their own right. They are organized. They are able to work together. They have a common history. They have common values. They have common goals in mind. They live in a common area, and they are able to work together, and they are able to become something that is significant in their own right. And Israel has to deal with that. Israel has to deal with that as they go into the Promised Land. As Israel is coming to go into the second time in the Promised Land, they skirt around the bottom of Edom and come back up on the east side there. And they have to do that because when they come to Edom and say, can we pass through? Edom says no and comes out against them with a strong force. They're organized. They're significant. They mean something together. They are a nation in their own right. They are enough of a nation that David has to conquer them, as I already mentioned. They're in 1 Chronicles chapter 18, right? He has to put them down in order to be able to rule over that area and deal with the threat. They are a nation in their own right. And later on, when we get to 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 8 through 10, as the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel are disintegrating, we find that finally Edom revolts for the final time and says, we will no longer work, we will no longer serve the nation of Judah. And they never do from that point forward, right? Which is the nearest thing you have to a fulfillment of what you see later on to Isaac's promise to Esau, that you will throw his yoke off of your neck when you're done, right? And so what you see is that Esau is becoming a nation. He becomes Edom, and that is a significant people. They are a nation just like God promised that they are. They are a significant nation, just like you would expect with one of the sons of Isaac, one of the sons of Abraham in that capacity. And the promises of God come true. They become a nation, and they throw off the yoke when they are ready. Right? Esau is simply a sign that the promises of God take place and are going to happen. There's a second sign, though, of the promises of God being fulfilled. If you go back to Genesis 36 with me, you have kind of a curious section that may have aroused your curiosity if you were reading this ahead of time. Verses 20 down through verse 30, we have another group of people referenced. Okay? If you look in verse 20, we see this. Now, these are the sons of Seir the Horite, the inhabitants of the land. Right? And then we begin to proceed with a detailed list of his descendants and his descendants' descendants, finally culminating in verse 29 with the list of chiefs. Right? That's our second line of chiefs that we have present. So what's going on with Seir? What's going on? Why bother to list out Seir the Horite? Why deal with this situation? We've been introduced to the Horites before. We saw them in Genesis chapter 14. When we were looking at that invasion of the kings of the east that Abraham ends up repelling. One of the nations that they end up defeating on their way down from the north is the Horites. They end up engaging with them and defeating them. More significantly, if you turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 2, we find that the Horites are not something to probably to sneeze at. Deuteronomy chapter 2, this is the last time we will ever see Horites mentioned. And it's Moses trying to give a history and trying to give some understanding and some instructions to the nation of Israel as they're getting ready to go into the land. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, Moses is instructing Israel that they are not going to invade the Edomites because that is their land that God has given to them. We're not going to deal with the Moabites because that's one of the sons of Lot and that land's been given to them. We're not going to deal with the sons of Ammon because that's another son of Lot and they have a land and that's been given to them. But we are going to deal with everyone else. Right? Everyone else is fair game, and particularly the one that they're getting ready to deal with is Sihon, king of the Amorites. As he's going through the history, in verse... Let me read in verse 19. When you come opposite the sons of Ammon, do not harass them nor provoke them. For I will not give you any of the land of the sons of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. It is also regarded as the land of the Rephaim. The Rephaim formerly lived in it, but the Ammonites called them Zamzummim. A people as great, numerous, and tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before them. And they dispossessed them and settled in their place. Just as he did for the sons of Esau, who live in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites from before them, and dispossessed them and settled in their place, even to this day. So, who is Esau going to dispossess? They're going to get rid of the Horites in the land of Seir. Horites live in the land of Seir. This all makes very good sense, okay? So what exactly happens? What takes place? And why do we have Seir the Horite being referenced back there in Genesis 36? You may recall that as we're looking in Genesis 36 and we are looking at those wives of Esau there early on in that chapter, one of them is mentioned as being, let me turn back there to Genesis 36. I'm going to butcher this if I don't read it directly. The second wife is listed as Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, and the granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. You run that back over into verses 20 through 30. What you find is Zibeon is in fact the daughter of Seir the Horite, and Anna, his son, gives birth to Aholibamah. Right? This is part of this clan that's mentioned. So the picture that begins to emerge is that Esau does in fact conquer Seir, probably destroying most everything except for probably the one single tribe of Seir that he was married to. Right? Everything else is destroyed. Everything else is gotten rid of unless it is married into. And so this probably is the significance behind the children of Seir that is mentioned here in Genesis chapter 36. These are the only ones that make it out. These are the only ones of the Horites that are going to live. Everyone else, Esau moves and dispossesses them and drives them out and gets rid of them, just as much as Ammon did to the descendants before them, just as the Moabites did to the descendants before them, and just as Israel is about to do there with Sihon, the son of the Amorites there. Now, why does this become significant, right? It seems interesting, right? It's interesting that we've got a relationship. You can now explain why we see a Seir the Horite, but what becomes significant about this? I take your attention back again to Deuteronomy chapter 2. And in verse 21, end of verse 21, speaking about the Anakim who are being destroyed, he says this, "But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and settled in their land, just as he did for the sons of Esau who live in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites from before them." The he is who? The he is God, right? The he is not Esau. The he is not Esau's descendants. The he is not one of the kings of Esau or one of the chiefs of Esau that we see in Genesis 36. The he is God. Esau's place there in Mount Seir is secured because that is what God wanted and because God caused this to take place. God promised that Esau was going to become a nation, and Esau becomes a nation. God gives him a land in the land of Seir, and Esau has that because God has accomplished that and done that for him. Esau's continued place, Esau's continued presence in the land, Esau's ability to be there as a neighbor to Israel, as a neighbor to Judah, exists solely because God has brought this to pass. Just as much as Esau has acknowledged the hand of God in allowing Jacob to have that land, and Esau moves, even so you look at Esau's presence there in the land of Mount Seir, and you have to acknowledge that this too is God's doing. He has caused this to take place. He has driven out people that are feared. just as much as the Anakim are, that Israel is terrified about the first time, right? Those individuals are dispossessed by God for the purpose of Edom, so that Edom can live there, so that Edom can become a nation, so that Edom can have that land. It is God's doing. It is God's work. Now it's application time, right? Why does God bother to tell this to the children of Israel here? Because they have the exact same situation as they go into the land of Canaan, right? Mark was referencing this in Sunday school this morning, right? Talking about the children of Israel. As they come into the land the first time, they run away scared after the spies come back with a report because these Anakim are really big. Deuteronomy chapter 2 is Moses' attempt to stiffen the backbone of Israel and say, these individuals that you're afraid of, they're defeatable. And in fact, not only are they defeatable, but God has done it multiple times. He's done it for Esau. He's done it for Ammon. He's done it for Moab. He's done it for all these people. And yet you're scared of these individuals? Right? Esau's presence there in the land is meant as a sign of Israel to say, if I will do this for you, if I will do this for Edom, right, who is not a child of promise, right? He's not the one. Jacob's the one. But if I am able to do this for Edom, and I do this for Edom, what am I going to do for you? It only secures the fact that the land of Canaan does in fact exist for the children of Israel to possess. And He will make it happen. And this is part of the beauty of Genesis chapter 36. It is pointing the sons of Israel in the right direction to say, look at what has taken place. Look at the faithfulness of God. Look at the way that He has interacted with Edom, someone who is not a child of promise, someone who has despised the birthright. He has still carved out a place for them. He has still been faithful to keep the word that He gave to them in Genesis chapter 25. And that's even with a promise that's not as significant as ours. A promise that's not as grand as ours. What will He do for us? And it should have stiffened their backbone. Their backbone should have been firm enough when they went into the land the first time to say, if He did that for them, He'll do it for us. Right? Moses has to re-stiffen them in Deuteronomy chapter 2 and say, look what He has done. 400 years that you've been down in Egypt, look what He has been doing over this time. He has been keeping His promise, and His promise can still be seen as having been fulfilled. That's what it's supposed to do for the children of Israel. That's what Genesis 36 is meant to do for them. And what is it meant to do for us? It's meant to do exactly the same thing. Right? If God is willing to do this for Edom, if God is willing to do this for Esau, a man who despises God's word, a man who despises the promises of God, a man who is willing to intermarry with the children of the land, which absolutely brings havoc to his parents. If God is willing to make a promise to that man and keep it, will He not do the same for us? This chapter is again another drumbeat and a steady drumbeats that have been given throughout this chapter of saying, look at the faithfulness of God. Look at how the fact that He makes these promises. Look at who He makes these promises to and for. And look at the fact that He still keeps them. And it should take you and I, in whatever state we find ourselves, right, in whatever challenge we find ourselves in, no matter how it is that we are thinking about ourselves this week, it should take us and bring us to the exact same spot once again of saying, I can trust Him. I will trust Him, because He has proven Himself to be faithful over and over and over and over again. These details here, these names, do not get lost in them, right? They're interesting, they're fun. But they simply point us to something that is a greater truth, right? Look at the faithfulness of God. He makes promises. He keeps promises. Do not doubt Him. Do not ever doubt Him, because everything points to the contrary. You have every reason to trust in Him. Let's pray. Father, we thank You once again. Father, we've come to this point often in Genesis. Father, we come to the point where we simply are standing in awe of Your faithfulness. That You would bother to make covenants with individuals, make promises to individuals. You make promises with individuals who are not even virtuous. We can't look at Esau and say this is a great man. We see his unbelief. We see his disobedience. We see the way that he treats Your word and the way that he treats you. But yet at the same time, we can understand that You are still doing a work with him, that You were making promises with him and keeping those promises. And we can see that through history. We can see that through the way that story is being shaped for us there. We understand who You are and how You behave toward us. And Father, I pray that gives us hope. I pray that that gives us confidence in you, that as these lessons are beat in and week out, Father, that we find ourselves trusting you, no matter what our situation looks like. Father, no matter what it is that we have done this week, no matter what it is we have done throughout our lifetime, Father, the promises in Christ are sure. The promises that you have made to us are firm. May we rest in them. May we trust in them and never doubt you at all. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.